Hello, folks, and welcome back to 10-Minute Elections. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2020, and as such, we have our Friday Grab Bag episode. Today, we are discussing polling and margins of error. So, here pulled up are the RCP polling averages the week before Election Day of Trump versus Clinton in 2016. So, in the state of Michigan, we have Clinton having an average of a 3.6 point lead, leading every poll with one outlier done by a Republican group, while in the final results, Trump won by about a quarter of a point. So a lot of people found this very shocking, and it was certainly a surprising result, but the key here is we have to look at the polling margin of error over here. So look, the margin of error is how much that the pollster estimates the actual results could fluctuate as opposed to the data they've collected. So, for example, we look at this poll right here from Gravis. A 3-point margin of error, it pegs Clinton at 46% support and Trump at 41%. The 3-point margin of error means each candidate could have plus or minus 3% support, meaning Clinton could have as low as 43 and Trump could have as high as 44. So this Clinton plus 5 could just as easily be a Trump plus 1 or a Clinton plus 11. So this Clinton 3.6 right here, if we factor in about an average of a 3.5-point margin of error, this could just as easily be a Trump 3.4 or a Clinton 10.6. So let's look at a state now. This one's very interesting, the state of Wisconsin. I have pulled up here the RCP polling averages throughout the last week, and Clinton's consistently having about a 6 to 8 point lead, although Trump actually won the state by 0.7 points. So look, the average margin of error here was about 4 or so points. So with a Clinton 6.5 point lead, we could get that as far right as Trump 1.5, but really this result was teetering right on the edge of the average margin of error. So this election result in the state of Wisconsin genuinely was fairly surprising. So now let's look at the state of Pennsylvania, one more of those blue wall states that Trump was able to flip in 2016 that Clinton was projected to win, all right? So a lot of polling data from the state of Pennsylvania, and Clinton pretty consistently has a small lead, although not in the anomaly poll from a Republican group. There was also one tie poll, again from a Republican group, but every non-Republican group pegged Clinton with a lead. So the overall RCP polling average from the week before Election Day was Clinton plus 2.1, but Donald Trump actually won the state by 0.7 points. Now the margins of error here are all over the place, and that's a bad sign. First of all, when polls are outside each other's margins of error, both of them are not going to be all that reliable. Also, when the margins of errors are very different, you really can't bank on all of that data as being reliable if the polls are showing, especially if they're showing different results and different margins of error. So I'm going to switch over to JHK forecasts here, and this is really telling, as you can see. This is a but if we go down and down, we see that the red and the blue, are the 80% confidence intervals for each candidate. So, for example, in the state of Florida, there is an 80% confidence that Biden could get. This is about as high as almost 60%, and that Trump could get almost as low as 40, but that could easily go the other way. Now, let's look at one of the safer perceived states. So let's look at the state of Colorado right here. So this is projecting Biden at 80% confidence could actually get as high up as something like 65% of the vote, but Trump could also win the state. It's a D10.3 projection, but just observe this massive margin of error that it is only projecting with 80% confidence. We look outside the blue and red, that's the other 20% right there. So the margin of error here is actually much more than was shown in the RCP polling averages. So that in mind, let's go over to now some of the 2020 data. All right. So here I have now pulled up the Trump versus Biden polling numbers in the state of Michigan. As we see, and the margins of error are going to, or at least should be higher at this point in the election cycle, but Biden has overall a 5.5 point lead with around a 3.5 point margin of error. So, worst case scenario for Biden, this is a Trump 1.5. This is about where Hillary Clinton was, although Joe Biden is generally outperforming Hillary Clinton by about a point at this stage in the election cycle. Of course, if Joe Biden does outperform Hillary Clinton by a point in each state, he will win and he will flip all of those blue wall states back in the Rust Belt by tilt margins. But yeah, that's the state of Michigan. Looks quite similar to what we saw with Clinton. But here's an interesting one. Let's go over now to the state of Wisconsin. So first of all, let me just bring up quickly, Wisconsin is the most conservative. It is the reddest blue wall state. It had a Republican governor in Scott Walker until he was defeated by Tony Evers in 2018. So the fact that Clinton's lead in Wisconsin was very nearly outside the margin of error should be a massive red flag about those polls, because if anything, Wisconsin is going to be the most likely of those Rust Belt states, and by that I mean Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, to flip. So we look at the polls right now, and there aren't a lot of them, but mostly they're showing Biden with about a 2 to 3 point lead, well within the margin of error, and especially because that margin of error is going to be organically larger at this point in the race. Now, in the state of Pennsylvania, let's look at Trump versus Biden there, and as we look at all of these Trump versus Biden polls in the Rust Belt and contrast them with the Trump versus Clinton polls, you can see that the states are in very different positions relative to each other. As we see right here, Pennsylvania is to Biden as really Wisconsin was to Clinton in 2016. And I certainly agree that Michigan and Pennsylvania are about equally likely to go blue and much more likely than Wisconsin. I rated Wisconsin as a tilt Democrat and Pennsylvania and Michigan as lean Democrat. So because we can more accurately line up what we know about those states and their electoral leans with the polls we have, we can probably trust these polls a little bit more than the Trump versus Clinton polls. But again, at this point in the election cycle, nothing's going to be all that reliable. So there's one more state's polls I want to look at, and it's the state of North Carolina. I discussed in my Monday video that the polls here were very sporadic. Yeah, only 4 real polls here released in the last month or two, and 2 of them were done by partisan groups. So you can see a Trump +7 in a Republican poll, a Biden +5 in a supposedly nonpartisan poll, a Biden +1 in a partisan poll. You can see the Democratic identity of the pollster, a Trump +3. These polls are just all over the place. They are so sporadic, and this really is why I felt like I couldn't identify North Carolina as anything but a toss-up, a true toss-up in the presidential election, because you have a Trump +7 that's nearly outside the margin of error. You have a Biden +5 with a 5.5% margin of error. That is a terrible margin of error for a poll. Then you have a 2.7 point margin of error for a Democratic pollster. They may not look the part, but these polls are all over the place, so we're really going to have to get some more conclusive data in the days leading up to Election Day. So one more thing regarding polls and margins of error I want to talk about, is I'm just going to leave this North Carolina RCP page up. In the 2018 midterms, Democrats had a solid advantage in the polls. They were up by about 8 points on the generic congressional ballot. For reference, they're up about 10 points right now, about 50% Democrat to 40% Republican on the generic congressional ballot. But most Americans thought, despite what the poll said, that Republicans would actually hold on to the House of Representatives due to such large mistrust of the polls in 2016. Generally, what people think is going to happen is a much better indicator of what's going to happen than what the polls say, but not this time around. So there's a lot more mistrust in polls, and I think pollsters are going to be much more careful this time around. Alright, thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video as always, and I'll see y'all on Monday when we'll go over the US Senate map.